All right, it is March 2nd, 2024, and my name's Peter Harpening, by the way, and I've wanted to for a while make a set of, I guess, lectures or explainers, explaining how seed phrases work in cryptocurrency. Um, and, I guess a broad outline is that so if you're, I'm assuming most people here, I kind of have a certain audience in mind. But basically, the way what this is, I'm trying to find an example. Let's see. Um, what this is it you'll have if you own cryptocurrency, you're probably familiar with this, but you'll typically get a phrase that's usually 11 or 12 words long. And what that phrase does is in theory you're supposed to be able to memorize it, write it down, and later on go and be able to recover your private keys. And what I want to do is explain how that works. Because it's kind of, well, you know, you can read. Um, so, in order to understand this, what I found is that most people who I try to explain this to, who are not cryptocurrency developers, are kind of only dimly aware of what private and public keys are. And so the goal of the seed phrase algorithm is to generate a bunch of key pairs, a private key and a public key. And, a precondition to understand any of this is to have, at least a vague intuition of what that is. And so that's the goal of this video, is to kind of give you an idea. Um, Now, most cryptocurrencies, I think every single one that I know of, use what's called elliptic curve cryptography. Now, my target audience here is basically smart teenagers. So I'm not expecting you to have, a super sophisticated math background. My background is as, I hate calling myself a mathematician, but somewhat of a mathematician. And I program as a profession. And what was I going to say? None of the math here is particularly complicated. There's just a lot of it. Um, Now, problem is kind of this mathematical culture. An elliptic curve is a smooth projective algebraic curve of genus 1 on which there is a specified point O. An elliptic curve is defined over a field K and defines points in K2, the Cartesian product of K with itself. If the field's characteristic is different from 2 and 3, then the curve can be described as a plane algebraic curve, which consists of, I don't know if that's big enough. I hope, solutions x1. Okay, now I know what all of this means. And if you're not a mathematician, then this just sounds like gibberish. And, maybe you'll try to, I don't know how to use the new Wikipedia. Maybe you'll try to, how do I change the language? I don't know. Maybe you'll try, simple English Wikipedia or something. And, or God forbid, you'll try like ChatGPT or something. And the problem in mathematics is that kind of mathematicians like to describe things in the most generic way possible. And necessarily that removes things from concrete intuition. So, first of all, here we are. Fuck off. Here we are. So what an so first of all, there's a bit more subtlety that goes into it, but I'm just gonna, again, the goal in this video is just to kind of give you some intuition and not to bombard you with detail. And trust me, we will go over the detail later, but just not right now. All right. God damn it. Forgot how to use this software. Okay, let's try that. There we go. Okay. So So first of all, I hope most of you went to high school and you, what the hell? Why in God's name would I want that dumbass fuck? Okay, supposed to. I probably shouldn't swear, but anyway, you're probably familiar with this idea. Hopefully, every single one of you has encountered the idea of coordinates. And if you haven't, and this is something you have trouble, wrapping your head around, then, uh, well, I can't say that. Um, but an elliptic curve is a curve of the form y squared is equal to, let me write it down, x cubed plus ax plus b. Okay. Now, what I want to emphasize is that these a and b numbers are, quote, free parameters. Okay. So what that means is, you start with, picking a value for a equals 9 and, b equals 67 or something. And that defines a specific curve. And what this curve, and very concretely, these curves, they kind of look like this. And you'll notice that we have y squared is equal to something that involves only terms in x. In particular, what this means is that I don't know, let's suppose that, 3, 4 is a point on the curve. So that means x is equal to 3 and, y is equal to 4. So just very concretely, a point, 3, 4 is on the curve. The way we can tell that this is on the curve, let's say a is equal to 9 and b is equal to 67. I don't know if probably this point is not on the curve. But, if we put a is equal to 9 in here, b is equal to 67, x is equal to 3, and y is equal to 4, if we plug all those numbers in and the equation is true, we get equal things on both sides of the equation, then the point is on the curve. If we plug those numbers into the equation and the equation is false, then the point is not on the curve. That's what it means for, this to be the curve. So that's all that means. What was I going to say? Okay. In particular, these curves, I'm not great at art or drawing, but if we look on Wikipedia, which has better graphs, and we're going to play around in GeoGebra in a minute, you'll notice that all of these curves have this vertical symmetry to them. So meaning if you cut the curve in half, it has a mirror symmetry to them. The reason for that is that you have y squared is equal to something involving only terms in x. Now what that means is if we plug x is equal to 3 into here and y is equal to 4, then we're going to get 16 is equal to, who cares? If we plug in y is equal to minus 4, well, hopefully you remember that if you take a negative number and you square it, you always get a positive number. So then we would still get 16 is equal to a bunch of stuff. So concretely, what this means is that if we have a point x, y, such that the equation is true, then x minus y, the equation will also be true. Okay, so let me just give some examples. And GeoGebra is both the most useful piece of software, one of the most useful pieces of software you'll ever encounter, and also probably the single most frustrating piece of software. Okay, let's just call this A, and we're going to call this B. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to create these sliders, and I'm going to try to upload this, and if I forget... By the way, I am really bad. Everybody who's a quote expert, unquote, in some field is really bad at reverse engineering the perspective of somebody who's not an expert. So there's things that are going to seem obvious to me that I'm not even going to bother explaining because I forget that that's a thing people don't know. Um, and then there's going to be things that are just like completely obvious that I think, need to be litigated for 20 minutes. So probably like everyone's familiar with the Cartesian plane, but then there's going to be some of you who like have never seen, this sort of notation before and then are going to be completely enamored. Like, what does AX mean? What does it mean when I put them next to it? It means you multiply them. Um, and then like some of you are not going to know what multiplication means, and um, let's continue. Let's see. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to plot the curve y squared, and I don't think that's big enough for you to see. It's equal to x cubed plus a times x plus b. Okay, and let me zoom out. And that's what this curve looks like. And I can adjust the values of a and b, and we get different looking curves here. There's a special case, a curve that you're not allowed to have. They're not allowed to have these sorts of cusps here. They're not allowed to intersect themselves. They're not allowed to do this. These are called degenerate curves. And in order to kind of have a better understanding of that, you need to know something called projective geometry, which is not that complicated. And I will explain that, I don't know, probably like 15 videos from now. But it's not, you can get a pretty good intuition from this at some point. But for now, just these curves are special. You're not allowed to have them. But these other curves are fine. And in particular, with elliptic curve cryptography, there's specific values of a and b, and we don't use sort of these continuous these real numbers. Instead, everything computers. Let me just show you an example. Computers are really, really bad at doing arithmetic with decimals. Okay, let me just give you an example. Okay, and the reason for that is that oh boy, how do I explain this? Okay, imagine with decimal notation, you add 0.333333 to 0.6666666. You're going to get 0.9999999 endlessly. And a weird mathematical fact is that 0.9 with an endless string of nines is actually equal to 1. The way you can tell is you ask what's the difference between them. What's 1 minus 0.99999 with an endless string of nines? Let me just write this down. You ask 1 minus 0.99 ... Well, the answer is that this is smaller. This is a positive number, or it's greater than or equal to 0, and it's smaller than every positive number, so this must be 0, which means they're equal. It's super, again, infinite decimals. Infinity in mathematics can get very counterintuitive. And most, you show this to like high school students and they don't believe you. But this is just a very simple way. Ask, what's the difference between them? 0. So computers are not very good at dealing with sort of continuous arithmetic. So when we do this sort of thing with computers, we're doing cryptography. Cryptography needs to be really, really, really precise. There is no room whatsoever, because the whole idea of cryptography is that if you have even a small error somewhere, it completely looks like garbage. You have to have everything exactly right. And that's why cryptography works. So there is no room whatsoever for this sort of thing in cryptography, which is one of the things that makes it very pleasant to deal with, actually, is that everything is very concrete, everything's very specific. There's no jiggling, there's no approximation. Everything's very exact. It's actually really, if you're, autistic, cryptography is probably your thing. Um, Now, what we end up doing is cryptography. There's a way to do this using only the whole numbers, which are called integers in mathematics. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, minus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what you can do is this thing called modular arithmetic, which is the mathematical term for what you might know as clock arithmetic. So let me just give you an example. Um, you know, 11 plus 1, oops, 11 plus 2 is equal, you use a triple equal sign, to 1 mod 12. And this is called modular arithmetic. And this is what we end up doing. And you might ask what's so special about modular arithmetic, and we'll get to this in a little while, but it turns out if your modulus here is a prime number, then you can do division purely with integers. Now what that means is that if we can do division, then we can just take all of our mathematics, all of our continuous mathematics, which division is this geometrically it means taking this distance and dividing it in half, but mathematically all that division means is that geometrically we think of 2 as doubling a length, but mathematically 1/2, and you think of 1/2 as having the length, okay, but mathematically 2 times 1/2 is equal to 1, and this is the important property. Now if we have a prime modulus here, it turns out that every single number will have a what's called a multiplicative inverse, which is meaning 1 over that number. Let me just give you an example. Okay. What the? Where's my terminal window? Okay. So, like I said, 11 plus 2, I can't remember how to do this in Python. Is it just mod 12? Does that work? Nope. I don't know. Do I have Haskell here? I do. All right. Okay. Why does it zoom out when I tell it to zoom in? Okay. So this is modular arithmetic. Now, if we pick a prime number, so let me just give an example. 7 is a prime number. And we say, okay, what is 1 over 2 in mod 7 arithmetic? And let me just figure it out in my head. I want you to figure it out in your head. What is a number that mod 7, so we do clock arithmetic, but we pretend there's 7 hours on the clock. What's a number that you can multiply 2 by such that mod 7 you get 1? Pause the video, figure it out. There's not that many choices, so it shouldn't be that hard. If we take 2 times 4 mod 7, we get 1. So 4 is equal to 1/2 mod 7. And likewise, 2 is equal to 1/4 mod 7. So what this means mathematically, again, mathematics historically developed starting with geometry. And the word geometry is an interesting name. It means measuring the earth. And largely geometry was developed sort of in the ancient Mesopotamian world, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Babylonia, that sort of thing, largely on practical grounds. Um, and so geometry meant measuring the earth. It was used as it was basically these sort of hacks that people had figured out use for, surveying tools. And like for instance, in Egypt, they would use this to restore people's property boundaries after the Nile would flood every year. And the Greeks kind of figured out that, hey, there's this meta here that we can abstract and we can put it into this abstract space. You've never seen an infinitely, never seen an infinite flat plane with an infinitely thin sheet of paper. But the Greeks figured out that there was some sort of magical world here that sort of existed outside of reality that that was independently interesting. Um, and that was Greek geometry. Now, 2,000 years worth of hindsight later, what we figured out is that, like, there's a lot of weird things that come up in Greek geometry. A lot of things that come up, like, what the hell does it mean to, take 1/4 of an integer and say that that's another integer? Or one, or you get the point. 1/4 of, you get the point. Like, you're taking division in a discrete space. You normally think of division as this very concrete geometric thing of taking something and dividing it up. You think about it as having a place in the world of continuous objects. And what we've kind of learned with centuries of hindsight is that, you know, we almost discover, as a species, I mean, discover mathematics sort of through sort of brute forcing our chimp brain intuitions. And one really, really strong intuition we have, really, really strong intuition, is this idea of distance. Distance is it's super fundamental to the way that we conduct ourselves. Um, Everything in our world revolves around distance. And if you kind of let the mathematics sing its own song, you'll discover that this is kind of it's trying to fit a square peg into a circular hole. That if you let the mathematics sing its own song, you get these kind of different ideas that show up. And as you get more advanced, not just in mathematics, but really in any field, you need to kind of learn to let the ideas sing their own song and not rely so much on your chimp brain intuitions. That said, you still do have chimp brain intuitions, and you need to be able to use them. Because otherwise, you just get lost in this sort of sea of abstract nonsense and you don't know what anything means. And again, that's how you write phrases. Oh, fucking hell. That's how you write phrases like an elliptic curve is a smooth projective algebraic curve of genus 1 in which there's a that's how you write something like this and get the idea in your head that this makes sense. Um, and what was I going to say? But if you, I'm talking too much. How long have I been talking? 23 minutes. Lovely. And I haven't talked about anything. Okay. The important idea about elliptic curves specifically is that you'll notice this thing here that says group theory. And I'm not going to explain what group theory is, but there's this interesting thing you can do. What you do is you pick a point on the curve and then you pick another point on the curve. It doesn't matter which 2 points. Okay? And I'm going to make these really big so that you can see them. Window. How do I get here? Let's try. It's going to pop. Here we are. Perfect. Let me make this red and make it really nice and big. Okay, and this one I'm going to make blue. And I'm going to make it really nice and big so that you can see it. And I should probably take this curve. The curve itself is not really that important. Um, and I'm going to make it kind of dashed so that you can, I don't know how well that's going to show up on the video, but hopefully this is reasonable. Oh, actually, I should make it full screen. Um, oh, this is lovely. If I move the window around, it changes the point. I love this app. Okay. Again, GeoGebra, both an extremely useful and extremely frustrating piece of software. Okay. Um, what I want to illustrate is this weird thing we can do here. So if I take the line that joins these 2 points, these 2 points have to be on the curve. An interesting fact is that this will always intersect the line in a third point. God, mother. Again, useful but incredibly frustrating. Now you might ask, what if these 2 points are exactly vertical? Then, like, where's the third intersection? Because, you know, where's the third intersection? Because this curve, goes away in both directions. There's no opportunity for this line to intersect the curve in another point. That's this sort of magical point O, and that's where you get this idea of projective geometry, and I'll talk about that in a while. But this is again, in order for this to make sense mathematically, again, you kind of slowly kind of abandon your intuitions and let the math sing its own song. And what you get is the so-called point at infinity. And there's a very concrete visual explanation I can give you, but I'm not going to give you that right now because uh, you need to visualize like intersecting planes, and I'm not good enough at drawing to do that. And I'll need to work on how to do the graphics. Okay, but just concretely, what you'll notice is that this line will always intersect the curve in a third point. Let me try to get it. It made a free point, didn't it? It made a free point. It made a free point. Okay, why would you make when I click the point where the line and the curve intersect? Why would you pick that point when you could just pick some random point that's almost what I clicked, but not what I clicked? I love this app so much. All right, let's try again. Let's try intersect EQ1 and F. There we go. Now it picks it. Okay, but it picked every intersection. I love it. I love it. I love it. How do I get rid of these? Okay, I just want... Let's try again. There we go. Okay. Now, let's see. And I want the point... So that's called C, x of C, y of C, and I want minus 1 times y of C. Okay, this is this point D. So in particular, let me just make this hollow and pink. Okay, and if we look... see, and then let's make this one really nice and juicy and pink. Okay, and let's just do the line C to D. Okay, and this, make it, okay, I don't want it to be labeled. Okay. Now, again, what you'll notice is that for A and B, I can always generate this point D. Oh, for Christ's sake. So it depends on the... Okay, the way GeoGebra is doing this is weird, but I'll... Okay. I'm going to show you a way to do this in like 2 seconds where you can just write some equations down and it'll automatically figure out the correct point. But you get the picture here. Given 2 points, I can find a third point. And in particular, what will happen is if I take a point and I try to do this, this is called the, let me write this down. This operation that I'm illustrating where I take 2 points and get a third point. This is called the elliptic curve group operation. Okay. This is called the elliptic curve group operation. And in particular, I can do it on a point with itself. And what'll happen is you take it'll end up doing is drawing this so-called tangent line. So it's this line that just comes in, just barely touches the curve, and then goes away. And it will touch the curve in another point. Like I'm trying to find a good illustrative example here. So the tangent line will touch the curve here at C, and then it takes as point D. So if you take the group operation, if you operate a point with itself, this is called point doubling. And I'll write down some formulas. And we're going to, by the way, we're going to implement all of this in code. It's just, this again, this seems like 2 minutes of information in my head because I just have a picture. And then I go to explain it, and it's like, oh, wait, none of this is complicated. Again, none of this is complicated. There's just a lot. And that's the way that complexity really works. Very few things are actually complex. Most things are actually just simple things combined. Most things that appear complex are simple things that are combined together in simple ways. But if you don't know the way things are structured, it looks complicated. And what I'm trying to do here is sort of show you what the structure is in a way that's intuitive, but that, I don't want to get bogged down and, what is a field characteristic? Okay, that's like, I can give you a definition. I think, I can't remember. I think that in our case, the character, when I talked about these so-called finite, these are called finite fields. A field just means a set of numbers where you can do this, where you can mathematically do division. And it's the, in our case, with the prime numbers here, we're going to be able to do, the characteristic, I think, will just be the prime. But I'm going to, the mathematicians listening can tell that my knowledge of abstract algebra is pretty lacking. But that's what a field, and I'll review all of this. Anyway. Point doubling is just taking the tangent line. Again, this is the version with our continuous curve. What this will do is motivate a number of formulas that will, so this is again building some visual intuition so that you can, figure out from this idea, if you go and look, God, mother can, all right. Okay, here is what's called the group law. So here's again the idea here. So you get P and Q, and then what you'll do is you'll P and Q, and then P plus Q would be the opposite point. Every point, the negative point here, it turns out that that is the so-called point at infinity, which again, if you think about it, is I'm really trying here, all right? But if you take a point and you take the sort of opposite point here, you can imagine this as being like a really large cylinder, okay? So you imagine this is a plane and it wraps around itself. But it also does so the opposite way, and it only intersects at a single point. Okay, and mathematically that's the way it works, and you can define this mathematically, and I'll show you how to do that in a little while. Again, none of this is complicated. It's a little bit counterintuitive. Um, but again, I can show you some intuition. Again, every piece of mathematics generally starts with some very straightforward intuition, and then you abstract it away. And then 15 steps later, you try to look at the result, and it looks like nonsense. And you're like, how the fuck does anyone understand this? But actually, it's all just, simple ideas combined in simple ways. But if you take this point and you ask, where does it intersect on the curve? Well, it's not going to intersect any of these points that we can see, but it will intersect that so-called point at infinity, the 0 point. And that's why these two are so-called inverses of each other. And consequently, if I take A and the point at infinity, and I say, okay, I'm going to draw the line from A to the point at infinity, and I'm going to ask, where's the next point that it intersects itself on the curve? Well, that would be B. That would be this point here. And I say, okay, what's the opposite point? Oh, that's A. So concretely what this means is that A plus this so-called point at infinity is equal to A. And plus just means the group operation. And we'll talk about why we use plus, and then you take the point with itself, and that's called point doubling. Okay, and then A plus minus A, which is the point that's opposite its mirror image in the vertical axis, that's always equal to O. So this O point basically acts, it acts like 0. And the reason that we use plus here is because this operation is symmetrical. So it should be fairly obvious what that means. So if I take A, what the hell? So if I take A and B here, this point C, if I take A and B and I were to swap the two rules, A plus B, I'm going to get this point D. But if I took B and A and just swapped their roles with each other, I would get the same point D. So this operation is symmetrical. Not all groups are, God damn it, the word symmetrical has a different meaning in group theory. The word in group theory is abelian, but it means the operation is symmetrical. Not all groups, in fact, the vast majority of groups, we'll have to learn some group theory, but the vast majority of groups do not have symmetrical operations, and those that do are very special, and that's why they're a lot easier to deal with. It's a lot easier to reason when you're allowed to, swap these arguments here. When that's available as a tool, it makes your algebra a lot easier. But that's why we use plus. Plus is just a convention that means symmetrical, or commutative. This is the same word as commutative operation. Okay, so hopefully you have a decent intuition about this elliptic curve group operation. Now, instead of trying to define this geometrically and dealing with, the most lovely program in the world, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these wonderful equations I've written down. Okay, so I've written these down in terms of P and Q, and in order to not confuse myself, I'm going to rewrite these as P and Q. Okay, and what we do is we define this term S, and let me write this down here so you can see it. It's all on Wikipedia. But so if we have, 2 points on the curve, P, which is the point X sub P and Y sub P. So this is just the coordinates of the first point. And then Q, which is X sub Q. These are just the coordinates, and Y sub Q. These are the coordinates of the second point. We define this quantity S, which is just an intermediate quantity, in the case where these two are distinct points. We define this term S as being, let me write it down. It is just Y sub P minus Y sub Q over X sub P minus X sub Q. Now, you'll notice that this is the difference in the Y values divided by the difference in the X values. In other words, this is rise over run, which if you did like high school math, hopefully this is traumatizing you. But all this is if you draw this line between the 2 points, all this S is the slope of the line. And when they are, now what you'll notice is that if this is the same, if X sub P and X sub Q are the same number, so there's two cases there. Either we're doing the so-called point doubling, or we're adding, group operating a point with its inverse. Then X sub P and X sub Q will be the same number, and so we'll end up dividing by 0 here. And you're not allowed to divide by 0. And except in projective geometry, you kind of can. And projective geometry, what it basically does, actually, let me just try to give you a tiny hint of intuition. And, there's this wonderful painting here. This is a Renaissance painting. So projective geometry, if you have a knowledge of mathematics, you can see, no, I want to open the image in the new tab. Let's see, trying to think of an example. So what projective geometry is, you can see sort of rudiments of it. You can see, ideas that you'll naturally develop in projective geometry back in ancient Greece, in particular with, actually, you see them a lot. One of the great Greek mathematicians was this guy Apollonius. If you've heard of Archimedes, Apollonius was a rival of his, or I can't remember. I believe they were contemporaries. I'm kind of rusty on the history. This is like 200 BC. By the way, if you're going to make a Mount Rushmore of mathematics, Mount Rushmore of mathematics, these are the 4 most important names: Euclid, Archimedes, Newton, and Euler. If you only read these 4 mathematicians, especially Euler, but really all 4 of these, you would be far more mathematically literate than even most professional mathematicians, especially Euler. Euler, I mean, historically, I mean, math education recently has become very dry and very kind of hard to understand, and it's become this very rote and mechanical subject. And that's the same. It's the same. It's the same reason that like. Oh, here, let me show you. This is really interesting. You know what? It's my channel. I can talk about whatever I want. Um, if you look at Steve Saylor wrote this fascinating article. So if you look at if you look at like city hall buildings in America before 1945, they're these beautiful, really ornate, really interesting buildings. And then after 1945, they become these like horrific sort of what's the word here? Let me find it. They look like commie blocks. No, you cannot see my location. They look like this type of thing. Um, Norilsk, Russia. This is just. I mean, look at this place. It's some like mining town. Um, you know, basically, you can just smell the bad tobacco just through the picture, right? Um, right. It's like stale tobacco that's been like frozen 15 times. you know. Anyway, there's this it's actually kind of interesting. So the Soviets, I mean, look what they did to their own architecture. But what's interesting is the mathematics. The Soviet period was almost the height of Russian mathematics. They were the only mathematical culture that sort of retained the beauty and the art in mathematics. And in the West, we sort of did to our mathematics what the Soviets did to their buildings, and we also did that to our buildings. Um, but the definitely recommend reading Russian mathematicians. They understand what math is about. What was my point? I don't remember. Um, oh, projective geometry. If you look at Apollonius, like 200 BC, he had the rudiments of projective geometry, but really kind of it came into its own during the Renaissance in Europe. There's really two great renaissances in mathematics. Um, oh, and Pappus in ancient Greece also developed like the fundamental theorem in projective geometry is called Pappus's theorem, and he was like I want to say 300 AD, so kind of towards the decline of the Greek period. But there's the basic history. So you'll notice there's two Greek names and two European names here, and those are kind of two big renaissances in mathematics. Um, the Greek Renaissance and the European Renaissance. And there were a couple of minor renaissances in between this period, but this is, 500 BC to the beginning of the Dark Ages, 300 AD, roughly. This is the Greek period. And the European period is, say, fall of Constantinople, really. What year was that? 1453, right? That's about right. So 1450 to mathematics kind of, let's just say 1950 is kind of when mathematics peters out. Okay. So this like 800-year renaissance and then a 500-year renaissance. And there were a couple, there were other things that were invented in that time. In particular, probably the most important invention in the history of mathematics is our notation for numbers, which came between these periods. That was from the Hindus. And then in between there, the Muslims had a renaissance. The Muslims, the Greeks, Alexander the Great brought Greek culture over to India, and a con part the Indians are going to get mad at me because there's a lot of them. You know, um, if you ever interacted with Indians on the internet, you know how like you'll go on the news and you'll see some article and it says like a trans black woman invented the toothbrush. You're like, what? No. Okay, and Indians are the same way. They think that like Indians invented the idea of the toothbrush, um, and somehow never discovered indoor plumbing. Anyway, so the Hindus created many things, but most important invention, they did a lot of astronomy, I think. I don't recall off the top of my head. The most important invention they did was our positional notation for numbers, which made, again, before computers, this made arithmetic a lot easier. The Muslims stole it from them, which is why we call it the Arabic number system. And, basically you can almost say this the end of the Dark Ages. You can almost trace the history of the world, the sort of rise and fall of civilization through mathematics. The Chinese also. We're going to be interacting with a lot of Chinese mathematics because they have developed a lot of important number theory. But the Arabic number system, um, the Arabs stole it from the Hindus, and then the Europeans stole it from the Arabs, and that's why we call it the Arabic number system. Let's see. So, okay, I was going to talk about cryptography. So we have rise over run here. Let's see. The new point x sub r, which is p, p plus q is equal to r. So x sub r is going to be, I'm looking at my notes, s squared minus x sub p minus x sub q. And then y sub r is going to be y sub p minus s times x sub p minus x sub r. Okay, so it depends on p and then this value that we computed here. All right. Wikipedia has a derivation which I don't find particularly interesting. Okay. So let's just write this down. S is equal to y of p minus y of q divided by x of p minus x of q. Okay, and this is just a number. In this case, it's 1.38, which is the slope of this line. Okay? Then, so let's call it xr is equal to s squared minus x of p minus x of q. Then yr is equal to y of p minus s times of p minus xr. Okay, and then we're going to call the point r is equal to x xr yr. How do I do that? It's point. Does that work? Nope. I think maybe I use square brackets, or how about that? Okay, there's r. I made a mistake because it's supposed to give us, so I copied down the formula wrong. because I copied down the formula and didn't read. Okay. Because it's supposed to give a, so if you can't see, it gave us this point up here. And it's supposed to give us the point down here. Okay. And you know what? I don't care. I'm just gonna say that it's -1 times all of that, because that's the answer we're looking for. Okay, and again, let's just say point okay. Okay, this is minus r. Again, if we take the line through P and Q, then we can take the okay, and I don't know if that's big enough for you to see, but okay. If I drag P and Q around, now you see this is a more stable formula. This is actually generating the correct point in every case. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about, so let me save this as EC, and I'll upload these as applets that you can play with online, and you can just toy around with these yourself. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is doubling. And what I might do, that'll take me a while, is I want to talk about doubling a point, okay? In this case, the formula is, so this is for x sub p is not equal to, including this, x sub p is not equal to x sub q. So not for point doubling and not for adding a point to its own inverse. Okay, in the case of doubling, we have s is equal to, so in this case we just have one point p. S is equal to 3 times x sub p squared plus a, which is a curve parameter, that's interesting, divided by 2 times y sub p. And on Wikipedia, they have a derivation of this, which is not particularly interesting. It's literally just the thing I described. Draw the line, solve algebraically for that point, and then take the negative point. That's it. Okay, and then x sub r in this case is equal to s squared minus 2 times x sub p, and then yr is equal to yp minus s times x sub p minus x sub r. Okay, and probably we're going to need to put a minus sign in front of it. Okay. So in this case, we have s is equal to x of, oh, I hate the auto parens thing. X of p times x of p plus a divided by 2 times y of p. Okay? And then in this case, it's just a number. Again, it's the slope of this tangent line. That's it. So if I move it up to here, it's about 0. Because if you imagine drawing the line horizontally here, that line is almost 0. Okay. In this case, we have xr is equal to s times s minus 2 times x of p. Okay? yr is equal to y of p minus s times x time here. You can maybe see what I'm doing here. Times x of p minus xr. Okay? Okay, and then we want a point xr, yr. And probably, yeah, it's going to give us this intersection here. And so we're just going to go here, and we're going to put a minus sign. Okay. So okay, I'm kind of running out of gas here. I'm sure everyone here is, just thrilled and enthralled because, Anyway, this point is called R. Or in particular, in this case, 2 times P. Let's just call it R. Okay. And again, if we were to draw the tangent line to P, do that, and take the opposite point, we get R. And if we were to do the same thing for R, we'd get another point. Okay? And let me see if there's an example here. Maybe find elliptic curve cryptography. Okay. Just to show you what's going on. How do you not have a diagram? Oh my God. Where is the elliptic curve group operation? Just show me. So it references group theory, but it doesn't have, okay. What I wanted was for you to kind of see what's called the orbit. So if you keep taking P plus R, P, adding it to R, and we say, what's P plus R? So again, what I'm wanting to illustrate, maybe I'll just draw it here. Okay, because I'm kind of getting sick of GeoGebra. Okay. Okay. I hate computers. Okay. So I'm going to do my best to draw the curve. Okay. So we took our point here, which was P. And then, we did our whole tangent line thing and found, that this point down here was 2P. If we take P plus 2P, which is the doubled point of P, then we would get 3P. And again, all this is P group operated with P to get 2P. And then if we do the same thing here, let me just try to do it plausibly at least. We do that. Okay, we get this intersection, and so this is probably 3P. Okay, and we do P with 3P. And I don't know where the intersection would be. Probably actually the intersection would be here. And so we go here. Let's just say it's here. Let's pretend that there's an intersection here. And then this would be 4p. Okay, we take p with 4p. We're going to get a point down here. And let's just say, up here is 5 times p. Do p with 5 times p. Let's just say we get a point over here. And then, this point would be 6 times p. And this is called the orbit of p. Okay? And all that is you just group operate p with itself over and over and over again. And what you'll find, we talked about how we'll have y squared is equal to x cubed. Okay? Equal to x cubed plus, I'm trying to think of a color, a x plus b mod p. Okay. And these things I've highlighted here, the weird things, these are the definition of the curve. The definition of the curve is simply the three numbers a, b, and p. Now in practice, this prime number is hundreds of digits long, so is a, so is b. And there's a specific curve, and that's the curve we use to do our, cryptography for cryptocurrency. Okay, and most cryptocurrencies all use the same curve, and it has a name. And we'll look into this in a little while. Okay, but what you also pick is a specific initial point, which is called a generator point. Okay, and this is our initial, oh shit, I should not have used the letter P. This P is a prime. This is a number. Sorry. And I even use the same color. Oops. Oops. These two P's have nothing to do with each other. Let me pick a different color at least. Okay, this is a prime number. What we also pick is a generator point, which let's just call it G, which is a point on the curve. And it has the property that when you group operate it with itself, I'm just saying group it with itself, over and over and over, that it hits every point on the curve. So you'll notice if all of these are finite numbers, so if we said that this was mod 7, well, let's just suppose that p was equal to 7, just for illustration of examples. Okay, well, 7, there's not very many numbers. How many choices do we have for x and y? Well, we have 0 through 6, because 7 is equal to 0 in mod 7 arithmetic, in the same way that if I take, if it's, what time is it? Let's just say it's 5 o'clock right now. In 12 hours, it'll be 5 o'clock. So mod 12, adding 12 does nothing. So 12 is equal to 0 in mod 12 arithmetic. So there's only, 7 choices for y and 7 choices for x, 7 choices for a, 7 choices for b. So all in all, and even here we've picked a specific a and b. So all in all, the number of points, if we were to, plot this entire plane of 7 by 7, there's only 49 total points, right? There's 7 choices for x and 7 choices for y. That's the total number of points in the space. The curve is only going to be a small subset of those points. Only so many of those points are actually going to be on the curve. So the point being is that when we are doing this with integers, the curve has a finite number of points. And this generator point, when we're doing this with integers, it has the property, another way of phrasing this sort of super awkward thing I wrote is that the generator has the property that its orbit is the entire curve. So it has, there's finitely many points on the curve. There's this generator point that has this magical property that when you keep, doing this thing where you jump around to the next point, eventually you hit every point on the curve and then you just cycle back to the original point. Okay, that's the idea of a generator point. Now, what the hell does any of this have to do with cryptography? Well, what I want you to notice here is that this jumping around of points kind of seems pretty random, right? And that should already get your head going because randomness is kind of the heart of cryptography. Randomness means unpredictability, but also this is sort of structured randomness, which means we can kind of do math with it. So what ends up happening is that if I want to find the 69th point, computationally, this turns out to be really easy. If I want to find out what is the point, I start with the generator G and I say, what is 69G? This is really easy. You can calculate this instantly. However, let's suppose that this point is, 87. In reality, these numbers are hundreds of digits long. They're really big numbers, but let's say this is 87 and 129. If I want to do the opposite, if I want to start with the point itself, I know that there is some number because of the construction here. This generator, its orbit is the entire curve. This is a point on the curve. I know it's in the orbit of the generator. If I start with this point and ask, what is the n? What is the, n such that this is the nth point? So if I ask the opposite question, if I say, okay, so here if I start with the number and I want to go to the point, that's easy. But if I start with the point and ask, okay, what number gets me to that point? That's supposedly is really hard. So the two things that are at the heart of cryptography are randomness and computational asymmetries. So that should tell you, that should get your head going. Now, what ends up happening on your elliptic curve? Finally, I can tell you what your private key and your public key are. This is your private key. Your private key is how many jumps do you do starting from the generator. Your public key is the point. This is your public key. Let me give you an example of how you might use this to come up with some sort of cryptography scheme. let's suppose that my private key is 69, and your private key is 420. Now, I publish what's public, what you know. So I know the number 69 and the 420 and your point. Okay? You know and the implication of the term private key is you better can keep it private. You know the number 420, and again, these numbers are randomly generated, they're hundreds of digits long, and my point. Now, what we can both do, and this is why that symmetry property I mentioned earlier is crucial, you can start at 420, or correction, you can start at my point and then do 420 jumps starting from there. Okay? So you can do 420 jumps starting from my point, and I can do 69 jumps starting from your point. And I'll show you how there's a bunch of tricks we can do to make this super, super fast. And I think originally the motivation for elliptic curve cryptography, it was back in I think like the 90s when this was developed, and it was for credit cards, or like back when like chip cards were just becoming a thing, and you wanted you basically wanted something that was secure and computationally very cheap. Okay, so I can do 69 jumps starting from your point. You can do 420 jumps starting from my point. Both of us have figured out what's 420 plus 69. I'm bad at math. This is 489th point. Only the two of us, only the two of us can compute this. Neither of us know that it's the 489th point. Okay? We just have computed a point in common. Okay? We've computed a point in common. So a shared secret. Okay? So a point in common or a shared secret, and nobody else can compute it. Can figure this out. Okay? And what we could then do, so let's just say we take the, y coordinate, and we were to, plug this. This is, a number that's, hundreds of digits long. Okay. And we were to plug this into, we were going to use it as the seed for a random number generator. We could then generate, a string of zeros, ones, 1, 0. So then use this to generate, string of bits of, quote, random bits. Okay. And we can both compute this string And we can compute this. Not only can we compute this while communicating everything about this in public. Both compute this. String. We can both compute this string of bits. Okay. Now let's say I want to send you, a message. Let's just say I want to send you hello. Okay. And I'm going to encode this into binary, which is it's a bunch of zeros and ones. What I can do, so let's just say this is, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, okay? And then we have our random bits, okay? And let's just say this is 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, okay? This is our random string, okay? And what I'll do is I'm going to just XOR these, XOR or a mod 2 addition. And we're going to talk a lot more about that, a lot more about mod 2 addition. There is way more to that than you think. But for this, so basically the 1 means flip the bit and the 0 means keep it the same. So the message I'm going to send over the wire is 1, 1. So different, same number, flip the bit. Or 1 plus 0 is 1. 0 plus 1 is 1. 0, 0, 1. Okay. And I've so basically taken the original message and just randomly flipped a bunch of bits. Okay. Now what you're going to do, you're going to take this message and you have this same string of random ones and zeros because we can both generate this. Nobody else can. Okay. 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0. And you're going to do the same thing in reverse. You're just going to use this to unflip the bits. 1 plus 1, that's 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1. I really hope I did this right. And lo and behold, you were able to get the original message back. And this is, this is a very simplified version of really how modern cryptography works. This idea of using this point in common to compute a shared secret, this is called Diffie-Hellman, I believe. I believe that's what Diffie-Hellman is. I'll fact check myself later. The Diffie-Hellman algorithm, and we can just go check. This is a thing. Diffie-Hellman might be a different thing, but this is one of the main thing. Let's just check, make sure that's actually what Diffie-Hellman is. Elliptic curve. Come on. Yeah, elliptic curve. Yeah, shared secret over an insecure channel. Yeah, so this is what I just told you. Allows two parties each having an elliptic curve public-private key pair to establish a shared secret over an insecure channel. This shared secret may be directly used as a key or to derive another key. The key or derived key may be used to encrypt subsequent communications using a symmetric key cipher. That's this XOR thing I just showed you. That's this. Okay, that's a symmetric cipher because decrypting and encrypting is the same. It's a variant of the Diffie-Hellman protocol using elliptic curve cryptography. And this is essentially, this is the basis of cryptocurrency. Now, the operations that we do in cryptocurrency are a little bit different. We're not necessarily interested in secrecy, but what we are interested in, when you look at what is a cryptocurrency, well, really all it is just a list of transactions. That's all. That's a list of transactions. And so, it says person A sent B 5 Bitcoins. And these, again, these are the so-called addresses. Addresses. Okay. And all these are points on the curve. So point A sent point B 5 Bitcoins. That's it. So it says point A sent point B 5 Bitcoins. There's a different thing, which I'm not going to get into in this video, where what you can do is sign a transaction, or you can do what's called a signature. So you can generate a bunch of random ones and zeros. So like with your private key, and you can attach it to the message point A sent point B 5 Bitcoins. So let's say that you're A. So it'll be the message point A sent point B 5 Bitcoins signed by A. Okay? And what that'll say is that whoever generated this message had access to A's private key. And we can prove that without knowing what the private key is. Again, that's this sort of magic of structured randomness that has these computational asymmetries in it. So point A sent point B 5 Bitcoins. Then this is one layer of the cryptography. And basically addresses are created on the chain whenever somebody sends you money. That's it. Okay? Point C sent, point D, 7 Bitcoins. Okay? And it's just a list of all of these transactions. There's a secondary layer to this. So this is kind of the first idea. Okay, well, that's kind of a cute idea. The second idea is what's so brilliant, which is basically answers the next questions. One, how do new coins get created? How do new coins get created? And then how do we verify that everyone is honest? How do we like trust? How do we trust that the ledger is correct? Okay. And the second idea there is basically to make it so that in order to generate a new coin, there's this really interesting idea, which is that basically, again, everything in cryptography, the root of everything is asymmetries. And there's really kind of one asymmetry that is fundamental in the universe, and that's the second law of thermodynamics. And that basically says that the universe overall prefers to go from an ordered state to a disordered state. And there's very precise mathematical definitions of what this means. Okay, and we can get to that. But roughly speaking, the universe prefers to go from an ordered state to a disordered state. So for instance, I have a phone here. That's a bad example. Let's suppose I had a glass. Okay, let's just pretend this water bottle was made of glass. And if I drop it on the floor, it breaks. So it goes from a state that's highly ordered to a state that's highly disordered. Left to its own devices, that's what the universe does. If you want to take something from a disordered state and move it back to an ordered state, this requires energy. This requires spending energy. So in our case, an example of how do we get energy, well, we take oil which is, this sort of very structured and ordered state. And we burn it to create heat. And then, this can, becomes electricity, heat, and pollution. And so it goes from an ordered state to a disordered state. And overall, the universe is still doing its accounting. Overall, the world has still become more disordered. So in order to go from a disordered state to an ordered state, locally you can do that, but overall, if you take account of everything, the universe is still becoming more and more disorderly. In particular, there's this question of like, how does money have value in the first place? And that's a really interesting question. And basically, the way that we used to solve that was with gold. And gold is actually a perfect example of this because the only way that gold can be created is when stars collide with each other. That we've never been able to make gold artificially. Gold, there's a finite amount of gold that exists on the earth, and we have to mine it, and we can't manufacture it. We can't manufacture gold. That's, I think, what makes the precious metals precious, is that we can't manufacture them the way that we can with, say, steel. My point. So gold is actually a perfect illustration of this, is that to create it requires a prohibitively high amount of energy. We can't even we can't even generate that amount of energy with nuclear reactors. It only occurs when stars collide with each other. Okay. So basically what we do is we say, okay, there's somebody who's called a miner. Hey, that's a familiar term. And his job is to verify that all the signatures are valid. And what he does, he publishes a block in the blockchain. And a block, concretely, again, this is, a little bit of an oversimplification, but a block is just a list of these transactions. It's just, a bunch of them. Then the next block is a bunch of new ones. Then the next block is a bunch of new ones. And what the miner's job is to verify that these are all correct. And miner publishes a block, and in return, the miner gets a new Bitcoin. That's why he's a miner. So in exchange for doing this work, he gets a Bitcoin. That's how new Bitcoins are created. But that's only this one question. How do we create new Bitcoins? How do we trust that the ledger is correct? Well, we use another asymmetry. We come up with these problems that have the following two properties. One, it's easy to verify that a solution is correct. Two, hard to solve. Okay? So the miner's job, he verifies that all the signatures are valid, he publishes a block, and he gets a new Bitcoin in return. What he has to do in order for everyone else to accept his solution, this is the same idea as a signature, by the way. It's very easy to verify that a signature is correct, but it's hard to generate a signature from scratch. And what the miner does is he publishes his block along with the solution to one of these problems. So we're utilizing here a very basic asymmetry that's built into our universe. So in order for this miner to publish his block and get it accepted by the rest of the network, he has to spend energy. Okay? In order for this miner to for anyone to accept that, his block is legit, he has to spend a energy. So basically he's taking energy and spending it, and in exchange he's getting a Bitcoin. And what we've done is we've ported the constraints of the physical world into computers. That's what's so brilliant about cryptocurrency. Um, we've taken the constraint of the physical world and we've ported it into computers. Um, let's see. What else did I want to say? Okay. Taken from energy into Bitcoin. So basically, how do we know that a Bitcoin is valuable? Because in order for that Bitcoin to have existed in the first place, somebody spent energy to make it. So somebody, so, and the idea is that energy itself is inherently valuable, and this is a physical fact of the universe. And it's such a deep, deep idea. Such a deep idea, this idea of utilizing the asymmetries in the universe, in particular, this asymmetry between order and disorder. This is just so fundamental, and if you read every old religious text, you'll start to see this idea. And I have a lot more to say on this. And I call this idea, by the way, this idea, it's called entropism. And if you take this fact about this, there's this asymmetry between creation and destruction, that creation is costly but destruction is cheap, and you start using facts about the universe and human biology, and you start admitting those as given, you can start you can do crazy things like create fucking digital money. Um, and then, you know, blah blah blah. You can also, start asking questions about what does this mean for human affairs. And you start asking those questions, and if you answer them, you'll start realizing that kind of the old religious texts actually had a point here. Um, it's very interesting. There's a lot you can do with this idea. It's a very important idea, really deep. Um, there's a different question, which is why can't you use Bitcoin to buy groceries? And the basic reason is that it's too slow. And again, you know how I'm presenting these sort of simplified versions of ideas, and really what the format here is that, okay, well, this is the, kind of basic core concept, but in order to make it work in practice, you need to actually, there's a bit of detail you need to add. Well, Bitcoin is basically, and same with most cryptocurrencies, are kind of, they're like that, where the basic idea is completely accurate. The basic idea is accurate, but the little details aren't there. They aren't, it's not fast. The big one is performance. The performance is the biggest problem. And there's other things, and I'm not sure. So, context, I used to be a programmer for a cryptocurrency called Eternity, and that project, let's just say, faced some difficulties of the drama category. And so I no longer work there. And I'm not sure how much more I'm allowed to say. Um, anyway, but Eternity, Eternity actually had saw the reason I thought, when I first looked into cryptocurrency, I thought it was all bullshit. and it is, to be fair. I mean, these ideas are not bullshit, but this idea that like Bitcoin is going to save the world, well, I think the Bitcoin religion is valuable. I think the social phenomenon of Bitcoin might save the world, but Bitcoin itself is objectively useless, um, because it's just simply too slow. Um, However, eternity, if eternity had, let's say, if eternity, let's say, was more socially stable, um, it had solved most of these practical problems dealing with performance, which is the only reason I was willing to work there. And hopefully I will have more to say about this later, and I can't say enough. I've probably said too much. Oh, you know what? I wanted to tie this back to seed phrases, and I've been talking for almost 2 hours, but we're almost done. Okay, what a seed phrase is. So the basic algorithm of seed phrases, and I can just vaguely summarize this. Now that you know what a key pair is, you know what all these sort of basic ideas are. Okay, so a seed phrase, you take, your 11 words in English. So these are just, let me just give you example. Okay. So this might be legal, winner, thank, year, wave, blah blah blah. Okay, this is an example of a phrase. What you do, you take that, you plug it into a password hashing function. Okay, then what else do you do? Then there's a different algorithm which I believe, so I think okay, I think BIP 44. Yeah, that's this one. And then from there you use that to generate a tree of key pairs. So this part, I believe, is B Bitcoin and Improvement Proposal 39. And then this part is BIP 44. And we will code all of this. We're going to code all of this. But this is the basic outline. You take your words in English, you send them to a password hashing function. And then from there, this generates, some random nonsense. Some random binary data, and you use that as the seed for an algorithm. That generates a tree of key pairs. And that's it. That's how this works. But in order for this to make sense, when I try to explain this to people, they get hung up and they don't know what a key pair is. So that's why I was talking about all this shit earlier. All right. Now, again, I don't think anything I explained was really that complicated. It was a lot of people, very brilliant people with a lot of really ingenious ideas who had to come up with all this stuff. But hopefully you can see that none of these ideas are really that complicated. They're just simple ideas combined together in simple ways that on the outside produce something that is just unimaginably complicated. But when you understand how it works, it's not that simple. There's just a lot. There's an hour and 44 minutes. And anyway, thank you for watching if you watched all the way to the end. And hopefully that made sense. Please post any sort of questions in the comments so that I can read them and ignore them. Bye.